In a quiet corner of Los Angeles, Elon Musk sat hunched over his laptop in his Tesla-designed office. The room was dimly lit, save for the soft glow of his screen. He scrolled through lines of text and encrypted files that he had uncovered during a routine cybersecurity check at SpaceX. What started as a mundane task quickly turned into something far more explosive. His eyes narrowed as he pieced together what he was looking at. Documents that hinted at one of the biggest scandals in American history. At first, Musk thought it might just be random noise, bits of information floating around on a server, but the deeper he went, the clearer the picture became. These weren't ordinary emails or casual conversations between colleagues. They were detailed exchanges between powerful players in media, politics, and big corporations. It seemed like they were working together to control how people thought about important issues like climate change, healthcare, and even elections. And the worst part? Many of these individuals claimed to stand for progressive values while secretly pushing agendas that lined their own pockets. Musk leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He knew this wasn't something he could ignore. If he exposed it, there would be consequences, not just for him but for everyone involved. People might finally understand how deeply the system was rigged against them. On the other hand, if he stayed silent, he'd be complicit in letting the deception continue. That wasn't who he was. Musk thrived on disruption, whether it was reinventing cars with Tesla or sending rockets to space with SpaceX. This felt different, though. Bigger, more dangerous. For weeks, Musk pored over the documents, cross-referencing details and verifying every claim. He didn't want anyone accusing him of spreading misinformation. By the time he felt confident enough to act, the weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him. Late one night, after ensuring all his bases were covered, he opened Twitter, now X, and typed out a cryptic tweet. "Prepare yourselves. What I'm about to reveal will change how you see America forever." Within minutes, the tweet went viral. Millions of people began speculating wildly. Was this about aliens? A new technology breakthrough? Or maybe another quirky announcement from Neuralink? No one guessed the truth. Musk watched as the internet buzzed with theories, knowing full well that reality would hit harder than any rumor. He gave it a few hours before releasing the first batch of documents online. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Dubbed the narrative files, the trove included emails, voice recordings, and financial records showing how certain journalists and politicians worked hand-in-hand with corporate lobbyists to shape public opinion. One email chain revealed a deal where a journalist agreed to tone down criticism of a pharmaceutical company in exchange for early access to groundbreaking research. Another showed a tech giant funding articles praising its sustainability efforts, while quietly lobbying against stricter environmental regulations. The most shocking revelation? Several prominent figures who claimed to champion progressive causes were secretly enriching themselves through backdoor deals. As the news spread, chaos erupted across social media platforms. Conservatives hailed Musk as a hero exposing leftist hypocrisy, while progressives accused him of cherry-picking information to discredit their movement. Mainstream media outlets scrambled to respond. Some denied any wrongdoing without addressing the specifics. Others awkwardly avoided discussing the topic altogether. And then there was one journalist, a well-known liberal voice whose name appeared repeatedly throughout the files. She went completely silent. This journalist had built her career as a fearless advocate for social justice. Her articles often criticized corporations for exploiting workers and governments for ignoring marginalized communities. Yet, according to the leaked documents, she had accepted large sums of money from those very same entities to write favorable pieces. When confronted online, she deleted her social media accounts and disappeared from public view. Rumors swirled. Had she fled the country? Was she negotiating a plea deal? Or was she too ashamed to face the public? Days turned into weeks, and the fallout continued. Protesters gathered outside major news organizations demanding accountability. Lawmakers called for investigations into potential collusion between media and corporations. Meanwhile, Musk faced intense backlash. Critics argued that releasing private communications violated ethical boundaries, regardless of the content. Supporters countered that transparency outweighed privacy concerns when uncovering systemic corruption. Amidst all the noise, Musk remained unfazed, tweeting cryptically about the cost of freedom. Despite the controversy, undeniable shifts occurred. Public trust in traditional media plummeted further than ever before. Independent journalists gained traction, offering alternative perspectives free from corporate influence. Politicians found themselves under increased scrutiny, forced to justify past alliances and policy decisions. Even some implicated individuals began speaking out, confessing their roles in hopes of redemption. As for the silent journalist, she eventually resurfaced, not to defend herself, but to apologize publicly. In a heartfelt essay published on a lesser-known blog, she admitted her mistakes, acknowledging the harm caused by prioritizing personal gain over journalistic integrity. Months later, the dust began settling. While many questions lingered unanswered, one thing became clear: nothing would be the same again. The exposure forced Americans to confront uncomfortable truths about power dynamics shaping their society. For better or worse, Musk's actions ignited a global conversation about ethics, accountability, and the role of technology in holding institutions responsible. Love him or hate him, no one could deny Elon Musk had once again disrupted the status quo in ways no one saw coming. The day after Elon Musk dropped the narrative files, the world felt like it had been hit by a storm. Social media timelines were flooded with reactions, memes, and heated debates. People couldn't stop talking about it. Some called Musk a hero for shining a light on the dark corners of power. Others accused him of being reckless, saying he was playing with fire by releasing private communications without considering the fallout. But one thing was undeniable: everyone had an opinion. For ordinary people scrolling through their feeds, the revelations felt personal. It wasn't just about politicians or journalists. It was about trust. Many had looked up to these figures as voices of reason, people who stood for fairness and justice. Now, they were seeing evidence that some of those trusted voices might have been putting profit over principle all along. Conversations around dinner tables shifted overnight. Friends argued passionately over whether the leaks were real or exaggerated. Families debated if this was the beginning of accountability or just another chapter in endless political drama. As the days passed, the focus turned to the individuals named in the documents. One name kept popping up: a liberal journalist whose reputation had once seemed untouchable. Before the leak, she was known for her bold critiques of corporate greed and her calls for social reform. Her articles often went viral, shared widely by progressives as proof that someone was still fighting for the little guy. But now, her silence spoke louder than words. Every attempt to reach her ended in dead air. Calls went unanswered. Emails bounced back. Even her closest colleagues admitted they hadn't heard from her since the files went public. Speculation ran wild. Some believed she'd gone into hiding, unable to face the backlash. Others whispered that she might be cutting deals behind closed doors, trying to save her career before the full weight of the scandal crushed her. A few conspiracy theories even suggested she'd fled the country altogether, though no one could confirm or deny them. Whatever the truth, her absence only added fuel to the fire. Reporters camped outside her home, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Online trolls dissected every detail of her past work, searching for clues they might have missed. Meanwhile, mainstream media outlets struggled to respond. CNN issued a vague statement denying any wrongdoing, but refused to address specific claims made in the documents. MSNBC anchors awkwardly pivoted away from related topics during live broadcasts, clearly uncomfortable. Fox News seized the moment, dedicating hours of coverage to slamming their rivals and praising Musk for exposing what they called the liberal media machine. The divide between left and right grew wider, with each side digging deeper into its trenches. But not everyone was picking sides. Independent journalists, bloggers, and podcasters saw an opportunity to step into the void left by traditional media. They dove headfirst into analyzing the leaked documents, breaking down complex connections in ways that resonated with everyday people. Their audiences grew rapidly as viewers sought out fresh perspectives unfiltered by corporate agendas. For the first time in years, there was a sense that maybe, just maybe, the internet could serve as a platform for genuine accountability. Back in Los Angeles, Musk watched it all unfold from his office. He knew he'd opened Pandora's box, but he didn't regret it. If anything, the chaos confirmed why he'd acted in the first place. The system was broken, and someone needed to shake things up. Still, he wasn't naive enough to think this would fix everything overnight. Change rarely came easy, especially when powerful forces were at play. But he also knew that moments like this, moments where people woke up to the reality of how things really worked, were rare. And when they happened, they planted seeds that could grow into something bigger. Critics continued to attack him relentlessly. Some labeled him a self-appointed vigilante, accusing him of cherry-picking information to suit his own narrative. Others claimed he was using the scandal to distract from his own controversies. Yet, despite the noise, Musk stayed focused. He tweeted sparingly during this time, letting the story speak for itself. When he did post, it was always cryptic, teasing hints of more to come without revealing too much. His followers hung on to every word, eagerly awaiting the next twist in the saga. Amidst the frenzy, ordinary citizens began organizing protests outside major news organizations, holding signs that read, "Truth over profits" and "Journalism should serve the people." They demanded answers. Who else was involved? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, what would happen to those responsible? While some dismissed the protests as performative, others saw them as a sign of growing frustration with systems that seemed rigged against the average person. Lawmakers, too, felt the pressure mounting. Calls for investigations poured in from both sides of the aisle. Politicians who had previously avoided weighing in now found themselves forced to take a stand. Some promised transparency and vowed to hold hearings. Others deflected blame, pointing fingers at their opponents while dodging questions about their own ties to lobbyists and corporations. It was messy, chaotic, and unpredictable. But it was also democracy in action. And then, just when it seemed like the story might start losing steam, something unexpected happened. The silent journalist reappeared, not on TV or Twitter, but in a quiet corner of the internet. She published a lengthy essay on a small blog, far removed from the glare of mainstream media. In it, she admitted her mistakes, acknowledging the harm caused by prioritizing financial gain over journalistic integrity. Her words were raw and unpolished, filled with regret and shame. She didn't try to justify her actions or shift the blame. Instead, she took full responsibility, promising to step away from journalism indefinitely to reflect on what she'd done. Her apology struck a nerve. Some dismissed it as too little, too late, accusing her of damage control rather than genuine remorse. Others saw it as a turning point, a rare moment of accountability in a world where apologies often felt scripted and insincere. Either way, her decision to break her silence reignited the conversation, reminding everyone of the human cost behind the headlines. As the weeks rolled on, the impact of Musk's bombshell continued to ripple across society. Trust in institutions plummeted, forcing people to rethink who and what they believed in. At the same time, new voices emerged, offering hope that change was possible, even if it wouldn't come easily. Whether this marked the beginning of a better future or simply another chapter in an ongoing struggle remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The confession from the journalist who had gone silent sent shockwaves through the public. Her words, though painful to read, felt raw and real. For many, it was the first time they'd seen someone in her position admit fault without trying to sugarcoat it or dodge responsibility. In her essay, she didn't just apologize, she laid bare how the system had pulled her in step by step. She admitted that at first she thought she could play the game without losing herself, accepting money here, softening a story there. It all seemed harmless enough. But over time, those small compromises added up, eroding her principles until she barely recognized the person she'd become. Her story resonated with people in ways no one expected. It wasn't just about her, it was about all of us. How often do we justify cutting corners because everyone else is doing it? How easy is it to tell ourselves we're still good people, even when our actions say otherwise? The journalist's apology struck a chord not because she was extraordinary, but because she was painfully ordinary. People saw pieces of themselves in her struggle, and that made her admission hit harder than any headline ever could. But while some found hope in her honesty, others weren't so forgiving. Critics tore into her, calling her apology a calculated move to save face. They pointed out that admitting guilt now didn't undo the damage she'd caused. Years of misleading stories, half-truths, and skewed narratives couldn't be erased with a single essay. Protesters outside major media offices held up signs referencing her name, demanding more than just words. They wanted action. Some even called for legal consequences, arguing that accountability needed teeth if it was going to mean anything. Meanwhile, Elon Musk remained eerily quiet. After his initial bombshell tweet and the release of the documents, he stepped back, letting the world process what had been uncovered. He didn't gloat or celebrate. Instead, he watched as the fallout unfolded, occasionally posting cryptic updates on social media. One tweet simply read, "When you shine a light on rats, they scatter." Another said, "Freedom isn't free." His followers dissected every word, searching for clues about what might come next. Was this the end of the revelations, or was there more to uncover? As the dust began to settle, cracks started appearing in the foundations of trust. People were rethinking everything they thought they knew. News outlets that once commanded respect now faced skepticism at every turn. Viewers demanded transparency, questioning motives behind every article and segment. Even independent journalists, who had initially gained traction during the scandal, came under scrutiny. Who funded their platforms? Were they truly free from influence, or were they just better at hiding it? This growing distrust created fertile ground for new voices to emerge. Podcasters, bloggers, and grassroots activists seized the moment, offering alternative perspectives untainted by corporate agendas. Their content wasn't polished or produced. It was messy, passionate, and unfiltered. And that's exactly why people gravitated toward it. These creators weren't afraid to ask tough questions or challenge the status quo. They reminded audiences that journalism, at its core, was supposed to serve the truth, not profits. Yet, not everyone welcomed this shift. Traditional media pushed back hard, accusing these newcomers of spreading misinformation and undermining professional standards. Debates erupted online about what qualified as credible reporting. Should experience and credentials matter more than authenticity and relatability? Or was it time to redefine what journalism meant in a digital age where anyone with a smartphone could share their perspective? In Washington, lawmakers wrestled with how to respond. Investigations were launched, but progress was slow. Politicians accused each other of stalling tactics, using the scandal to score political points rather than seeking solutions. Behind closed doors, lobbyists worked overtime to protect their clients' interests, ensuring that any proposed reforms wouldn't cut too deep. Meanwhile, watchdog groups kept the pressure on, filing lawsuits and organizing campaigns to hold key players accountable. For ordinary citizens, the chaos was overwhelming, yet strangely empowering. Conversations around dinner tables and water coolers grew louder and more animated. People debated the ethics of whistleblowers like Musk, questioning whether the ends justified the means. Could exposing corruption really excuse violating privacy? Or did the scale of the deception warrant extraordinary measures? These discussions spilled onto social media, where hashtags like Truth Matters and Expose the System trended daily. Amidst the noise, community-driven initiatives began sprouting up across the country. Grassroots organizations formed to advocate for media reform, pushing for stricter regulations on corporate influence in journalism. Others focused on educating the public about media literacy, teaching people how to spot bias and verify sources. Libraries hosted workshops, schools integrated lessons on critical thinking, and local newspapers embraced newfound interest in investigative reporting. Back in Los Angeles, Musk continued observing the ripple effects of his decision. He knew he'd ignited a firestorm, but he also understood that revolutions rarely followed neat timelines. Change was messy, unpredictable, and often painful, yet he believed it was worth it. In private moments, he reflected on the weight of what he'd done. Had he crossed a line? Maybe. But in his mind, staying silent would have been worse. As he scrolled through endless threads debating his role in the scandal, he felt a strange mix of pride and unease. Pride because he'd shaken things up, unease because he knew the battle was far from over. One evening, as he sat alone in his office, Musk received an unexpected message. It was from a group of independent journalists, thanking him for giving them a platform to speak freely. They acknowledged the risks he'd taken and expressed hope that his actions would inspire others to stand up for truth, no matter the cost. Reading their words, Musk allowed himself a rare smile. For all the criticism and controversy, maybe, this was the silver lining, a chance to rebuild something stronger, fairer, and more honest. But even as optimism bubbled beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Not everyone agreed on what the future should look like. Some wanted stricter oversight, fearing unchecked power would lead to more abuse. Others argued for less regulation, believing freedom thrived best without interference. The debate raged, on unresolved and unlikely to end anytime soon. And so, life moved forward, carrying the scars of the scandal but also the seeds of change. The journalist's apology lingered in the collective memory, a reminder of both failure and redemption. Musk's tweets continued sparking conversations, challenging people to think critically about the systems they lived in. Independent voices grew louder, refusing to let the old guard reclaim control without a fight. Though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. The world had woken up. Whether it stayed awake depended on the choices people made next. As the weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of Elon Musk's bombshell continued to reshape the landscape of American society. People weren't just talking about the scandal anymore, they were living it. Trust, once a fragile thread, holding institutions together, now felt like a relic of the past. Yet from the ashes of broken faith, something unexpected began to emerge. A hunger for truth that refused to be silenced. The journalist who had apologized publicly became both a cautionary tale and an unlikely symbol of redemption. Her decision to step away from journalism didn't go unnoticed. In fact, it sparked conversations in newsrooms across the country. Editors held meetings with their teams, urging them to reflect on their own practices. Some reporters admitted they'd felt pressured to tweak stories or bury uncomfortable truths to please advertisers. Others confessed they'd been too afraid to speak up when they saw something unethical happening. The confession of one person had cracked open a door that many thought was permanently sealed shut. For everyday Americans, this shift wasn't abstract, it hit close to home. Families gathered around kitchen tables discussing how much of what they read or watched could actually be trusted. Parents warned their kids not to believe everything they saw online, while teenagers rolled their eyes, claiming they already knew better. Social media feeds lit up with memes mocking mainstream media, but also with posts encouraging people to dig deeper. Do your own research became a rallying cry, though it carried its own risks. Without proper guidance, some spiraled down, rabbit holes of conspiracy theories, confusing noise for clarity. Still, the underlying message stuck. People wanted honesty, even if finding it meant wading through chaos. Meanwhile, independent creators thrived in ways no one predicted. Podcasters, who had once struggled to gain traction, suddenly found themselves flooded with listeners eager for unfiltered perspectives. Bloggers dissecting the leaked documents attracted millions of views, offering breakdowns that resonated because they sounded less like polished scripts and more like late-night talks between friends. One blogger in particular gained widespread attention by creating simple visual guides to explain the complex web of connections revealed in the narrative files. His work went viral, shared by everyone from college students to retirees trying to make sense of it all. But not everyone welcomed these new voices. Traditional media outlets launched counterattacks, accusing independent journalists of lacking credibility and spreading misinformation. They argued that real journalism required training, ethics, and accountability, things amateurs couldn't possibly provide. Critics pointed out errors in some of the grassroots reporting, using those mistakes to dismiss entire movements. Tensions escalated as debates spilled onto live TV shows, where anchors grilled self-proclaimed truth-seekers about their qualifications and motives. These clashes only fueled more skepticism. Viewers tuned in expecting answers but walked away, feeling manipulated. The divide widened further when a major network aired a documentary attempting to discredit Musk's role in exposing the scandal. Instead of swaying public opinion, the film backfired spectacularly. Audiences saw it as desperate damage control, and ratings plummeted. For the first time in decades, traditional media seemed out of touch, unable to connect with a public demanding transparency over spin. In Washington, lawmakers faced mounting pressure to act. Investigations dragged on, bogged down by partisan bickering and legal loopholes. Lawmakers accused each other of protecting powerful allies, turning hearings into shouting matches rather than productive discussions. Meanwhile, lobbyists worked tirelessly behind the scenes, ensuring any proposed reforms wouldn't threaten their clients' interests. Despite the gridlock, watchdog groups refused to give up. They filed lawsuits, organized protests, and kept the story alive in the court of public opinion. One breakthrough came unexpectedly during a town hall meeting in a small Midwest city. A local activist stood up and asked a congressman directly why nothing concrete had been done despite months of promises. The congressman hesitated, clearly caught off guard. When he finally responded, his answer was vague and evasive, prompting boos from the crowd. That moment, captured on camera, went viral. It crystallized the frustration millions felt, not just toward politicians but toward anyone in power who seemed unwilling to deliver real change. Back in Los Angeles, Musk observed it all with a mix of satisfaction and unease. He hadn't expected the fallout to stretch so far or last so long. Every day brought fresh headlines, new accusations, and heated arguments. Some praised him as a modern-day whistleblower, comparing him to figures like Edward Snowden or Julian Assange. Others vilified him, calling him reckless and irresponsible. Yet, amidst the noise, he noticed something remarkable. People were paying attention. Conversations that might have stayed hidden were now out in the open, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths. Musk himself remained enigmatic, posting sporadically on social media. His tweets ranged from cryptic musings to sharp critiques of the status quo. One post read, "If you can't handle the truth, maybe you shouldn't call yourself a leader." Another simply said, "Freedom is messy." Followers dissected, every word speculating endlessly about what he might do next. Would there be another round of leaks? Or was this the end of his crusade? Behind the scenes, Musk wrestled with doubts. Had he gone too far? Was the cost of exposing corruption worth the collateral damage, the careers ruined, the relationships shattered, the trust eroded? Late at night, sitting alone in his office, he scrolled through comments from ordinary citizens thanking him for giving them a voice. Those messages reminded him why he'd acted in the first place. Corruption thrived in darkness, and someone had to turn on the light, even if it burned. As the year drew to a close, signs of progress emerged, however tentative. Grassroots organizations pushing for media reform gained momentum, drawing support from unlikely allies. High school teachers incorporated lessons on media literacy into their curriculums, teaching students how to question sources and spot bias. Local newspapers, once struggling to stay afloat, saw renewed interest as readers sought alternatives to corporate-controlled narratives. Even some mainstream outlets made efforts to rebuild trust, launching initiatives aimed at greater transparency and accountability. Yet, challenges remained. Deep divisions lingered, with skeptics dismissing calls for reform as naive or impractical. Conspiracy theories still spread unchecked, muddying the waters and making it harder for legitimate voices to be heard. And while independent creators continued to thrive, they faced pushback from platforms cracking down on content deemed controversial or inflammatory. The battle for truth was far from won. Still, there was hope. hope that the cracks in the system would widen enough to let sunlight, in hope that individuals armed with curiosity and courage could hold the powerful accountable. Hope that the messiness of freedom was a price worth paying for a future built on honesty. And so life moved forward, carrying the scars of the scandal but also the seeds of change. The journalist's apology lingered in the collective memory, a reminder of both failure and redemption. Musk's tweets continued sparking conversations, challenging people to think critically about the systems they lived in. Independent voices grew louder, refusing to let the old guard reclaim control without a fight. Though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. The world had woken up. Whether it stayed awake depended on the choices people made next. Months after the initial bombshell, the ripple effects of Elon Musk's revelations began to settle into a new kind of rhythm. The chaos hadn't disappeared, it had simply evolved. People were still angry, still skeptical, but now they were channeling that energy into action. Grassroots movements gained momentum, and for the first time in years, ordinary citizens felt like they had a voice loud enough to be heard. One of the most surprising developments came from small towns across America. In places where national politics often felt distant and disconnected, local communities started organizing town halls to discuss media accountability. These weren't fancy events with polished speakers or catered snacks. They were raw, unfiltered, gatherings held in community centers, libraries, and even people's living rooms. Neighbors who'd never spoken before found themselves sitting side by side, sharing stories about how misleading headlines or biased reporting had impacted their lives. A farmer talked about how false narratives around agriculture had hurt his business. A teacher explained how misinformation campaigns had made her job harder when trying to educate students on critical thinking. Each story added another layer to the growing demand for change. In bigger cities, protests took on a creative edge. Artists painted murals depicting broken chains and magnifying glasses over newspapers, symbolizing the search for truth. Musicians wrote songs about corruption and courage, performing them at rallies packed with thousands of people holding signs that read, "Truth over profits," and "We deserve better." Social media buzzed with videos of these performances, spreading inspiration far beyond city limits. One viral clip showed a young woman rapping about media bias in front of a crowd chanting along with every word. Her lyrics were sharp and pointed, calling out hypocrisy while urging listeners to stay vigilant. It wasn't just entertainment. It was activism set to a beat. Meanwhile, independent creators kept pushing boundaries, finding innovative ways to reach wider audiences. Podcasts became the go-to source for many seeking untainted perspectives. Hosts interviewed whistleblowers, activists, and everyday people affected by the scandal, offering a platform for voices that traditional media ignored. Some episodes focused on practical advice, teaching listeners how to spot fake news or fact-check claims. Others dove deep into the leaked documents, breaking down complex connections in language anyone could understand. One particularly popular podcast episode featured a panel discussion with former journalists who admitted they'd compromised their ethics under pressure. Their candid reflections struck a nerve, reminding listeners that systemic problems required collective solutions. Traditional media outlets, however, struggled to adapt. Ratings plummeted as viewers turned away in droves, unwilling to trust institutions they saw as complicit in the scandal. Networks scrambled to win back audiences, launching flashy ad campaigns promising honest journalism and unbiased reporting. But slogans alone couldn't rebuild shattered trust. Viewers tuned in briefly, only to switch off again when they sensed spin or bias creeping back in. Some networks tried partnering with independent creators, hoping to borrow credibility by association. While a few collaborations succeeded, others flopped spectacularly, coming across as insincere cash grabs rather than genuine efforts at reform. Lawmakers, too, faced mounting scrutiny. Investigations dragged on, bogged down by red tape and political infighting. Lawmakers accused each other of stalling tactics, using the scandal to score points without delivering real results. Yet public pressure persisted. Protesters camped outside government buildings, refusing to leave until meaningful action was taken. Watchdog groups filed lawsuits targeting corporations implicated in the leaks, demanding transparency and accountability. Activists organized letter-writing campaigns, flooding congressional offices with demands for reform. Slowly but surely, cracks began to form in the walls of resistance. One breakthrough came during a heated Senate hearing. A whistleblower from a major tech company testified about how algorithms were manipulated to amplify certain narratives while suppressing others. His testimony revealed chilling details about secret meetings between executives and lobbyists, confirming suspicions that social media platforms weren't neutral spaces, but tools wielded by those in power. The room fell silent as he spoke, his words cutting through layers of denial and deflection. When the session ended, reporters swarmed him, eager to learn more. Within hours, his story dominated headlines worldwide. Back in Los Angeles, Musk watched it all unfold with a mix of pride and frustration. He'd hoped exposing the truth would spark immediate change, but progress was slower than he'd anticipated. Still, he refused to give up. Late one night, as he scrolled through endless threads debating his role in the scandal, he stumbled upon a comment that stopped him cold. It read, "You didn't just expose corruption, you reminded us we have the power to fight back." Those words stayed with him, fueling his determination to keep pushing forward. Musk's influence extended beyond politics and media. Entrepreneurs inspired by his bold move began questioning unethical practices in their own industries. Tech startups pledged to prioritize transparency, vowing not to sell user data to the highest bidder. Nonprofits launched initiatives aimed at educating the public about digital literacy and ethical consumption. Even schools joined the movement, incorporating lessons on media bias and corporate responsibility into their curriculums. Teachers reported seeing a shift in their students. Kids who once accepted information at face value now asked tough questions, refusing to take anything at face value. Yet challenges remained. Conspiracy theories continued to spread online, muddying the waters and making it harder for legitimate voices to be heard. Platforms struggled to strike a balance between free speech and preventing harm, often alienating users in the process. And while independent creators thrived, they faced increasing scrutiny from critics accusing them of lacking professionalism or expertise. The battle for truth was messy, unpredictable, and exhausting, but it was also necessary. As winter approached, signs of hope emerged. Local newspapers, once on the brink of collapse, saw renewed interest as readers sought alternatives to corporate-controlled narratives. Independent filmmakers released documentaries shedding light on overlooked issues, drawing attention to stories mainstream media ignored. Community leaders organized workshops teaching people how to verify sources and spot manipulation tactics. Slowly but surely, the pieces began falling into place. The journalist who had apologized publicly resurfaced briefly, this time to announce she was starting a nonprofit aimed at promoting ethical journalism. Her announcement sparked mixed reactions. Some applauded her effort to make amends, while others dismissed it as an attempt to salvage her reputation. Regardless of motives, her initiative drew support from unlikely allies, including former colleagues, and grassroots activists. Together, they worked to create resources for aspiring journalists, emphasizing integrity over influence. Through it all, Musk remained a polarizing figure. Supporters hailed him as a hero, crediting him with igniting a global conversation about ethics and accountability. Critics accused him of playing God, warning that his actions risked destabilizing fragile systems. Yet even his detractors couldn't deny the impact he'd made. Conversations that might have stayed hidden were now out in the open, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths. And so, life moved forward, carrying the scars of the scandal but also the seeds of change. The journalist's apology lingered in the collective memory, a reminder of both failure and redemption. Musk's tweets continued sparking conversations, challenging people to think critically about the systems they lived in. Independent voices grew louder, refusing to let the old guard reclaim control without a fight. Though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: the world had woken up. Whether it stayed awake depended on the choices people made next. As the months rolled on, the impact of Elon Musk's revelations continued to ripple outward, shaping not just headlines but everyday lives. People weren't just talking about corruption anymore. They were actively working to dismantle it. The energy that had sparked protests and debates now fueled tangible efforts to rebuild trust in institutions that had betrayed them. It wasn't easy and progress was uneven, but there was an undeniable sense of momentum. One of the most striking changes came from within schools and universities. Educators recognized that the next generation needed tools to navigate a world where truth often felt slippery. Teachers began integrating lessons on critical thinking into their curriculums, encouraging students to question everything they read or heard. High school classrooms buzzed with discussions about bias in news articles, while college professors assigned projects analyzing algorithmic manipulation on social media platforms. Students dove into these assignments with surprising enthusiasm, uncovering patterns and connections that even seasoned adults missed. One teenager created a viral infographic breaking down how fake news spreads online, earning praise from experts who called her work a masterclass in digital literacy. Outside of classrooms, grassroots organizations took center stage in the fight for accountability. These groups, often led by volunteers balancing full-time jobs and family responsibilities, organized workshops, webinars, and community events aimed at educating people about media ethics. In one small town, a group of retirees started a book club focused on investigative journalism. They read exposés, dissected sourcing methods, and debated whether reporters had done enough to verify facts. What began as a casual gathering quickly grew into a local movement, inspiring similar clubs across the country. Members joked that they'd become accidental watchdogs, holding journalists accountable over coffee and cookies. Meanwhile, independent creators kept innovating, finding new ways to connect with audiences hungry for authenticity. Podcasters experimented with live recordings, inviting listeners to join conversations via video calls. Bloggers collaborated on multi-part series, pooling resources to investigate topics too complex for solo efforts. One particularly ambitious project brought together a team of writers, researchers, and graphic designers to create an interactive website mapping out corporate influence in media. Users could click through layers of data, tracing connections between advertisers, lobbyists, and editorial decisions. The site became a go-to resource for activists and educators alike, praised for its clarity and depth. But not everyone embraced this shift toward transparency. Traditional media outlets pushed back hard, accusing independent voices of lacking professionalism and spreading misinformation. Some networks launched smear campaigns against popular podcasters and bloggers, labeling them amateurs unworthy of public attention. Critics argued that without formal training, these creators risked doing more harm than good. Yet instead of silencing them, the attacks only strengthened their resolve. Listeners rallied around their favorite hosts, defending them fiercely, against accusations they saw as baseless attempts to protect the status quo. Lawmakers, too, found themselves caught in the crossfire. Public pressure mounted as watchdog groups demanded concrete action. Protesters gathered outside state houses, chanting slogans like, "No more secrets" and "Hold them accountable." Lawmakers responded with mixed results. Some proposed meaningful reforms, while others introduced bills widely seen as empty gestures designed to placate voters without addressing root causes. One particularly contentious debate erupted over campaign finance laws, with critics pointing out how money funneled through dark channels allowed corporations to sway elections without accountability. Despite the gridlock, activists refused to back down, organizing marches and petitions until their demands couldn't be ignored. In Los Angeles, Musk watched it all unfold with a mix of awe and frustration. He'd always known exposing the scandal would unleash chaos, but he hadn't anticipated the sheer scale of resistance from entrenched powers. Still, he drew strength from the stories flooding his inbox. Messages from teachers thanking him for sparking classroom discussions, from parents grateful for resources helping their kids spot bias, from ordinary citizens inspired to take a stand. One letter stood out. A young woman wrote about how she'd quit her job at a PR firm after realizing her work helped cover up corporate misconduct. She thanked Musk for giving her the courage to walk away and start fresh, pursuing a career in nonprofit advocacy. Reading her words, he felt a flicker of hope amidst the noise. That hope spread further when high-profile figures began speaking out. A former CEO admitted on national television that he'd once paid journalists to write favorable stories about his company. His confession shocked viewers, sparking renewed calls for stricter regulations on media-business relationships. Another executive followed suit, revealing how lobbying groups orchestrated smear campaigns against competitors under the guise of objective reporting. Each admission chipped away at the facade of impartiality, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about the systems they relied on. Even Hollywood got involved, albeit cautiously. Filmmakers released documentaries exploring themes of corruption and redemption, drawing parallels between fictional narratives and real-world scandals. Actors used their platforms to amplify grassroots initiatives, donating proceeds from benefit concerts to organizations fighting for media reform. Celebrities who might have shied away from controversy before now spoke openly about the importance of ethical storytelling. Their involvement brought fresh eyes to the movement, introducing younger audiences to issues they might otherwise overlook. Through it all, challenges persisted. Conspiracy theories still thrived online, muddying the waters and making it harder for legitimate voices to break through. Platforms struggled to moderate content without alienating users, often facing backlash no matter what approach they took. And while independent creators gained traction, they also faced burnout. Many worked long hours for little pay, driven by passion rather than profit. Burnt-out podcasters paused shows indefinitely, exhausted from the constant grind of producing quality content without institutional support. Yet despite these hurdles, signs of progress emerged. Local newspapers reported record subscription numbers as readers sought alternatives to corporate-controlled narratives. Independent filmmakers secured funding for projects highlighting overlooked issues, proving that audiences craved authenticity over spectacle. Community leaders hosted town halls where residents could voice concerns directly to elected officials, bridging gaps between citizens and policymakers. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild. Not overnight, but brick by brick. The journalist who had apologized publicly resurfaced once more, this time to announce her nonprofit's first major initiative, a fellowship program supporting aspiring reporters committed to ethical journalism. Applications poured in from around the globe reflecting a hunger for change that transcended borders. Her decision to mentor the next generation signaled a turning point, not just for her but for the industry she'd once let down. Back in Los Angeles, Musk reflected on the journey so far. He knew the battle was far from over, but he also saw glimmers of a brighter future. Conversations that might have stayed hidden were now out in the open, challenging everyone to do better. Independent voices refused to be silenced, pushing boundaries and demanding accountability. Ordinary citizens stood up, refusing to accept a system rigged against them. And so, life moved forward, carrying the scars of the scandal but also the seeds of change. The journalist's apology lingered in the collective memory, a reminder of both failure and redemption. Musk's tweets continued sparking conversations, urging people to think critically about the systems they lived in. Independent voices grew, louder, refusing to let the old guard reclaim control without a fight. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear: the world had woken up. Whether it stayed awake depended on the choices people made next. As the months turned into a year since Elon Musk dropped the narrative files, the world had changed in ways no one could have predicted. What started as a scandal became a movement, a messy, chaotic, but deeply human effort to reclaim trust and accountability. The cracks in the system hadn't closed, instead they'd widened enough for sunlight to pour in. People weren't just talking about change anymore, they were living it. One of the most profound shifts happened quietly, almost unnoticed at first. It wasn't flashy headlines or viral videos. It was something far simpler: conversations. Families sat around dinner tables discussing how to spot bias in news articles. Friends debated over coffee about which sources to trust. Strangers connected online, sharing tips on fact-checking and verifying claims. These small moments added up, creating a culture where questioning authority wasn't seen as rebellious but necessary. For the first time in years, critical thinking felt like a shared responsibility rather than an individual burden. Schools played a pivotal role in this transformation. Teachers who once struggled to engage students with dry textbooks now used real-world examples to make lessons come alive. A high school history class analyzed old newspaper clippings alongside modern-day coverage of similar events, challenging students to identify differences in tone and framing. College journalism programs revamped their curriculums, emphasizing ethics over speed and accuracy over clicks. Graduates entered the workforce armed not only with skills but with a renewed sense of purpose, to tell stories that mattered without compromising integrity. Grassroots organizations kept the momentum going, proving that ordinary people could drive extraordinary change. In towns across America, volunteers hosted workshops teaching digital literacy to seniors. One group created a hotline where callers could ask questions about suspicious articles or social media posts. Another launched a podcast series interviewing whistleblowers from various industries, giving listeners a behind-the-scenes look at corruption and courage. These efforts might have seemed small on their own, but together, they formed a network of resistance against misinformation and manipulation. Independent creators thrived in this new landscape, carving out spaces free from corporate influence. Podcasters collaborated with educators to produce episodes explaining complex topics in simple terms. Bloggers partnered with artists to turn data into visually stunning infographics, making information accessible to wider audiences. Some even experimented with crowdfunding campaigns, allowing supporters to directly fund projects aligned with their values. This model didn't just sustain them financially, it strengthened the bond between creators and communities, fostering a sense of ownership and shared mission. Traditional media outlets, however, faced an uphill battle. Ratings continued to decline as viewers sought alternatives to polished yet hollow narratives. Networks attempted to adapt by hiring independent voices and launching transparency initiatives. But skepticism lingered. Audiences wanted proof, not promises. When one major outlet published a detailed report exposing its own ties to corporate, sponsors' reactions were mixed. Some praised the move as brave and overdue, while others dismissed it as damage control disguised as reform. Either way, it signaled a growing awareness that survival depended on earning back trust, not demanding it. Lawmakers finally began taking meaningful steps toward accountability, though progress remained slow and uneven. After months of protests and petitions, Congress passed legislation requiring greater transparency in political advertising. Another bill aimed to regulate algorithmic manipulation on social media platforms stalled in committee, bogged down by lobbying efforts. Still, activists refused to give up, organizing marches and rallies until lawmakers couldn't ignore the pressure. One particularly powerful moment came when a young woman testified before a Senate panel, recounting how fake news had cost her family their business. Her story struck a nerve, reigniting calls for stricter oversight. In Los Angeles, Musk reflected on the whirlwind he'd unleashed. He knew he'd made enemies, powerful ones, but he also saw glimpses of hope everywhere he looked. Messages poured into his inbox daily, thanking him for sparking conversations that needed to happen. One letter stood out. A retired teacher wrote about how she'd started a community newsletter focusing on local issues ignored by mainstream outlets. She credited Musk's actions with inspiring her to take matters into her own hands. Reading her words, he realized that the true measure of success wasn't headlines or hashtags. It was the lives touched along the way. Even Hollywood embraced the spirit of change, albeit cautiously. Filmmakers released documentaries exploring themes of truth and deception, blending entertainment with education. Actors used award speeches to highlight grassroots movements, urging fans to support causes bigger than themselves. Musicians penned anthems celebrating resilience and unity, performing them at benefit concerts raising funds for media reform initiatives. Celebrities who might have shied away from controversy before now stood shoulder to shoulder with activists, amplifying voices too often drowned out. Yet challenges persisted. Conspiracy theories still spread online, exploiting fears and frustrations for clicks and likes. Platforms grappled with balancing free speech and preventing harm, often alienating users regardless of their approach. Independent creators faced burnout, struggling to sustain passion projects without institutional backing. And while some corporations pledged to prioritize ethics, others doubled down on secrecy, betting that public attention would eventually fade. But despite these hurdles, signs of progress emerged. Local newspapers reported record subscription numbers as readers sought alternatives to corporate-controlled narratives. Grassroots campaigns succeeded in holding powerful figures accountable, proving that collective action could yield results. Community leaders organized town halls where residents voiced concerns directly to policymakers, bridging gaps between citizens and government. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild. Not overnight, but brick by brick. The journalist who had apologized publicly reemerged once more, this time announcing her nonprofit's expansion into international markets. Applications flooded in, from aspiring reporters eager to learn ethical practices and challenge corrupt systems worldwide. Her journey, from complicity to confession to redemption, reminded everyone that change was possible, even after failure. Back in Los Angeles, Musk scrolled through endless threads debating his role in the scandal. Some called him reckless, others hailed him as a hero. But amid the noise, one comment resonated deeply. "You didn't just expose lies, you reminded us we have power." Those words stayed with him, fueling his determination to keep pushing forward. And so life moved on, carrying the scars of the scandal but also the seeds of change. Conversations sparked by Musk's revelations continued, challenging everyone to think critically about the systems they lived in. Independent voices grew louder, refusing to let the old guard reclaim control without a fight. Ordinary citizens stood up, refusing to accept a rigged system. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear: the world had woken up. Whether it stayed awake depended on the choices people made next.